Hey everybody, Corey Weathers here. I'm going to give you guys just a couple minutes to log on and see that this is happening. I'm going to share it on my page so that if you guys jump on, I would love to see you guys as well. So welcome to the second live video on talking about sacred spaces. We're doing a Sacred Spaces book club where each week, every Monday at noon Central Time, I'm going to be talking about a chapter of the book. Not necessarily just to promote the book that I wrote, but it's more about me walking through that journey again and how it's going to hopefully impact my marriage and maybe cause some changes in me that I think it's probably time for me to revisit. So I hope that you will join me. So those of you who are watching, please share it so that other people can join in with you. I'm going to share it to the group that we have going that is kind of a deeper dive. So if you're interested in doing the book club with me this summer and diving a little bit deeper into the book and really answering some of those book club questions and taking on the marriage challenge where we're pursuing our marriage for the summer, not that you shouldn't pursue your marriage at other times, but that it gives you a specific way to pursue your marriage. We're diving a little bit deeper in that for the book club group that's going on. So that is going to, hopefully that's going to work out okay. So those of you who are watching, if you would make sure that that's shared for me, that would be awesome. So it should have, so we'll see if it did. So it's great to see you guys back for the second Monday, the second group to talk about the book. So this chapter was all about heeding the call. And I put as a title, those of you who are watching, say hi so I can see who is joining me today. But we're talking all about the chapter that was called Heeding the Call. And it really was setting up my experience of what it was like to get ready to go on this trip overseas where I got to travel with the Secretary of Defense. The plan was to visit Afghanistan, Iraq, Turkey, and the Persian Gulf. But what was crazy about that event was that I kind of sort of knew where I was going and that I was asked to pull together a passport and the visas for certain countries. But beyond that, I had no idea where I was going. I had no idea what my experience was going to be like. And in the chapter of the book, I really talk about my, hi Stephanie, thanks for watching. I like your profile picture, by the way, that's fun. So in the chapter, I really talk about processing my feelings leading up because we were packing and getting ready to move at this point. So it was a very vulnerable time. It was also December, so it was right before Christmas. So it was a super vulnerable time to think about leaving the house, going on a trip where I didn't even know where I was going, didn't know what the experience was going to be like, didn't know what I was going to learn from it. So it was very exciting because I hear from a lot of spouses all the time, I just want to do something fun. I just want to go on an adventure. I want to get to experience something new and different like my spouse gets to experience. Meanwhile, your spouse is probably saying, the serving spouse is probably saying, sure, let you go to a third world country where you can sleep in a bug net and deal with all of the boredom there, right? We hear that a lot. But for me, I also had that feeling of excitement, like, this is going to be so interesting to go to these other countries, to visit troops, to see what I hadn't seen before. And so I was really excited to go. But I was also very, very nervous about going. I'm leaving my family during a very vulnerable time. My kids were like 11 and 11 and 9, something like that at the time. So I was leaving them during a transition. I was going to miss their first day of school, of at least visiting their teachers and meeting their teachers, which you guys know how vulnerable that is. And I was going to miss the delivery of our household goods. And those of you who are military know that is not a one-person job. I mean, it is like PCS bingo and making sure everything goes where it needs to go and watching for things breaking. And so I was just leaving at a very, just a really rough time. So I had a lot of push and pull that was going on in my heart. And I expressed this in the chapter, but I also had Matt tell me at that time on a day where I'd already kind of gone for a run and trying to get the anxiety out of my system a little bit. And it wasn't working, that I just was nervous about the move and had lots on my plate, and I'm thinking about Christmas gifts, and I'm also excited to go on this trip. And so I want to go, but I want to stay. But I really want to go, but I really feel like I want to stay. I don't want to leave the family, but I really think this would be really fun and interesting, and I'm excited to do it, but I feel bad for feeling that way. And it was this constant back and forth. And that's when Matt sat down with me and said, if you are going to go overseas, And if the whole point of this trip is for you to go overseas and try to understand what service members go through during a deployment, then you need to start paying attention to what you're going through time now. Exactly what you're feeling right now is exactly what every service member goes through before they deploy. And so you need to take note of that now. And it's kind of like I had like this like tunnel experience all of a sudden, where I was like kind of just being sucked into a black hole and realizing that I knew it was hard for him to deploy, and that I knew it was hard for him to be excited and be on mission and be about leaving. And I knew that he felt bad for going, but I'd never felt that way before. And so to be in that moment where I was actually feeling the guilt of leaving, but I was also excited, and I couldn't answer that dilemma within myself. I couldn't, if I said no to the trip, then I was saying no to something that I felt really privileged to do, really capable of doing, something that I felt like I was ready to do, and I was being given an opportunity to do it. And so I didn't want to say no to it, because then I'm not doing what I feel like I've been created to do, right? But I didn't want to say yes to it, because somehow saying yes to it meant that I was saying no to my family. And there was no way to answer either of those feelings. I really just had to push through it and go, I have to figure out how to be okay with leaving my family. And I have to be okay with knowing that it's okay for me to be excited that I'm leaving my family to do this thing. And that's where I really, for the first time, experienced that push and pull, that wanting to stay, wanting to go, wanting to stay, wanting to go. And how do you resolve that within yourself? And it was there, that was the first time I realized the power that my spouse had in that moment to release me, to give me the permission, not just to go, but the permission to be excited about it. That was the key difference. And I honestly felt extremely convicted, because in the past, I wanted him to feel okay about going, but I don't know if I could say if I felt okay with him being excited to go. Like, did I give him the space and the ability and the permission to be excited to leave? And that just because that person is excited to go and do what they're called to do and that they're built to do and that they've been trained to do, doesn't mean that they're choosing that over their family. And I think sometimes we're afraid that that's going to be true, that they're choosing that over family. And I realized for me in that moment that it was true that you could hold both of those, that you could be both excited to go and feel like you are on mission, and at the same time feel guilty for leaving your family and also want to be in two places at once. So that's a lot of what I cover in Heeding the Call. I also talk about having this moment that was really powerful for me. I don't know if it was necessarily powerful for those of you who've read it, but I talk about breaking a plate. And I actually thought it would be fun. So I'm going to walk over to my bookshelf here. Okay. So I thought it would be fun to show you guys actually the actual plate. If you're reading the book or have read the book, that I wanted to show you the actual plate that actually broke, and that this is a true story. And so in the book, I talk about how I was dusting the house and I was thinking on all these things, and I was thinking about the trip and the excitement and the push and the pull and just feeling all of these feelings at once. And I dropped this plate that was a gift from a Gold Star widow. And I was devastated because it was such a sacred space. And if you've been reading the book or have sacred space, what I define as a sacred space is a multi-sensory experience that we have all had, whether it's a positive thing or a negative thing, whether it's a joy-filled memory or a traumatic-filled memory. But it is a multi-sensory experience of something that changes the trajectory of your life. So it's a moment in time that happens that you're kind of forever changed by it. And it's multi-sensory in that you can remember how you felt, you can remember what you saw, what you heard, just all your five senses. And because it changes the trajectory of your life, you have a hard time explaining to people why that moment was significant to you. And for me, one of the sacred spaces in my life was sitting down with a Gold Star widow during a deployment, and sitting there for about 3 hours and talking with her and just visiting with her when she was grieving the loss, just finding out about the loss of her soldier. And years later, that Gold Star widow gave me this plate. And every time I saw this plate, and it says on wings of gratitude. And that's what she gave me as kind of a thank you. And it was, every time I saw that plate, I thought to myself, I knew exactly what that moment was about. I know what that relationship is about. It's grounded and founded on a sacred space moment for both of us. A sacred space moment that we both experience in two very different ways, and they're sacred to us in two very different ways. But I can look at that plate and know exactly the feelings that I had, the thoughts that I had, how it changed my life. And so here I am dusting my living room, and I drop it and I break it and shatter it. And I was just devastated because it's not something I can ask for another, right? Or replace it. And Matt came home later that day and I was in tears, and I said, I don't know what to do with it. I don't want to throw it away. And he is so good at casting vision in our lives, and I'm so grateful that he does this. But he said no. In fact, I'm going to actually read what he says. I said, I didn't know what to do with it. I can't bear to throw it away. And he said, no, we are going to glue this back together because that's what we do. It's who we are. We take the shattered pieces of people's lives and find a way to mend them. And in that one moment, he cast a vision not only for our life and our marriage and our mission of what we do, what I do with the podcast, what I do with when I was traveling overseas, the whole purpose of that, what I'm doing with you guys right now, what he does as a chaplain. It was in that moment that he cast vision and said, no, we're going to glue it back together. And it's going to be a reminder that that's what we do. We glue the brokenness of people's lives back together and convince them that it is okay that you feel broken, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are. And he had no idea how much that was going to play out as a theme throughout even the book. But I wanted to show you. This is actually, let me see if I can get this to focus. This is actually the plate that she gave me. And so I don't know if you can tell, but there is like right through there is a huge crack. Let's see if I can get that away because I'm just showing the reflection of the screen. But it's a huge crack in the plate. So I wanted to actually show you guys that we actually did glue it back together, and it stays on my shelf as a constant reminder of what is my mission, what is my purpose, so that I know every day when I walk into my office, there is that plate. What do? I mend people back together. And that's where I find my energy. It's where I find my purpose. So I wanted to ask you guys a couple questions. Number one, those of you who are watching, have you experienced you or your spouse feeling that push-pull? I know we can, even if you've never traveled overseas, so comment in the comment thread, have you experienced either your spouse saying that or maybe how you saw your spouse dealing with that? But I think that if you are a spouse listening, a supporting spouse listening, we can relate to it in some other ways. We can try really hard to kind of sit in the pocket of putting ourselves in our spouse's shoes and go, let me take something that I probably relate to on that, and then I'll apply it to what they experience. So let me give you an example. One way to do this is, let's say you either work from home or you have a job or you have a hobby or you take care of yourself through exercise. Anytime you have to choose taking care of yourself or doing something that you're passionate about instead of, let's say, parenting in that moment, or not sacrificing yourself for the needs of other people. We have that push-pull experience, don't we? We have that moment where we go, you know what, I feel bad for going and taking care of myself. I feel bad for going to work when I could be staying home or meeting my kid for lunch at school, right? We have those feelings and we know what that's like, that we can both want to go and do the right thing, but we can also feel that guilt to stay at home, that is a push-pull. And so we need to be able to pay attention to that. So if you have experienced that, give me an example, write a comment of how you have experienced before feeling that push-pull, because the goal of us doing the Sacred Spaces book challenge this summer is to pursue your spouse, but it is also about, can we just pause our life for just a moment and put ourselves in our spouse's shoes and think about what they experienced that has, for them, changed the trajectory of their life. But it's also about understanding the world and trying to understand a little bit better by listening, by paying attention. Maybe you and your marriage have gotten to a place where you've started to zone out. I know I started doing that after a while, where my husband would say things to me. He'd be talking to me about his day, and I was just zoning out because I had heard the same story a million times, right? Have you guys experienced that? Where you get to a place in marriage where you're just not really paying attention as much as you used to? So this summer is really about how can you be more intentional to pursue your spouse just a little bit better than before. Now, I know that there are some of you, and I kind of referenced this last week, there are some of you out there that are tired, and maybe you've been taking the initiative for a long time and you're waiting for your spouse to do it instead. And I'm encouraging you to instead to start saying to yourself, I can't wait for my spouse to do all the work. I can't stop pursuing my marriage. I have to do it anyways. So even if you're tired, even if you've been the one that's been taking the initiative, this is about tweaking that initiative that you're taking. Instead of choosing to pursue your marriage so that you see some sort of change in the other person and that hopefully they retaliate or kind of give back. Instead is I'm going to choose to be intentional to slow myself down and actually listen to what you're saying because I want to be a better wife. I want to be a better husband. I'm not going to listen to you more intently so that you experience something and you feel a different way and that therefore you know that I love you. That's too much on the other person, and seeing, you don't have control over that person and their thoughts and their feelings and what they conclude, but you do have control over yourself and you can decide to change some things in your life for the sake of your marriage. Chelsea says 24/7. Do I work or spend time with yes, Chelsea. Do I work or spend time with the kids? Do I take work off to watch a ceremony or pinning? Do I focus on my husband's stories about the base or focus on my daily needs? It is a constant push and pull. That's a perfect example, Chelsea, to be able to go, I know what that push and pull is constantly. And Chelsea, let me ask this question. How powerful would it be if your spouse came to you and said, Chelsea, I don't want you to feel like you have to choose one or the other. I want you to, let's say, go to work. I'm going to take care of the kids. You go to work, fully focus on your job and stay at that job until you get everything done and you feel like you're at peace and you can close that window, kind of like closing out a computer screen, but close out that window so that when you're home, you can be fully present with the kids. If your spouse had given you permission to do that and made it possible, what would that do for you? Would that permission and that him being intentional to giving you the release and the permission to fully focus, would you be able to come back a better, more present mom if you had that? So Chelsea, I want to see if you're still with me. What would your response feel like? So Chelsea, if you're still here, write that. Let's see. Stephanie says, recently moving overseas, do I take the kids and go early, which would leave my husband to finish up there? He's never done any part of PCS alone. That's okay. So Stephanie, this is a very similar experience to what I experienced in the book. That's a great example. Did I just go to heaven? Chelsea said. Okay, Chelsea, I'm going to come back to that. Okay, so let me address Stephanie. So Stephanie, this is a great example, great time, because this is one of those times that you guys as a couple have to figure out what's the best case for the kids, what's the best case for the family. But you doing that, then you have guilt with him taking on so much at home, but what's the best way to handle it? Here's what I want to say to both of you guys and to everybody else listening. This is about this whole book and this whole summer challenge and the marriage challenge that includes the bracelets and our Sacred Spaces military challenges. Let me get mine because I posted it right at my desk where everybody could see it. So, and the Sacred Spaces military challenge card. All of this comes down to, can we intentionally be the person and make the choice to know what our spouse needs and have that communication, but know how to give our spouse the permission that they need to be in order to be their best wherever it is that they need to be. So Chelsea, this means you going to your spouse and saying, I feel a push-pull between these two things right now. And would you be willing to help me with that guilt? Is there a way that we can arrange for you to take the kids so that I can be fully present there? And for you to say to your spouse the same thing. How can I make it easier for you to go to work every day and fully be present at work? Or how can I be more intentional to give you the permission to deploy when it's time to deploy, knowing that we at home feel like you're not choosing work over us, that it is okay for you to put your sights on the mission, fully focus on that. Doesn't mean that you ignore everybody and you don't call home or anything like that, but can you give your spouse permission to face forward when it's time for them to walk out the door and be who they need to be. And then it's how do you have those conversations with each other to go, I'm going to be intentional to make sure that you feel fully present and able to go and do what you're called to do. And you, Chelsea, I'm kind of picking on you here for a second, but just kind of using you hypothetically to go communicate that to your spouse too, to go, I feel torn, I feel split, and this is something that you can do to help me with that. So Chelsea said, yes, I would. I think taking a break mentally and physically helps. We have done this here and there, but it literally is amazing the change that you see. So what would it look like, right? Exactly what you said, Chelsea. What would it look like if you guys did it regularly? So the chapter 1 that I referenced was all about, and you're going to see in chapter 2, I just in chapter 1 had the realization of that push and pull. I had the realization of I didn't realize that this was actually the weight of what he was experiencing before he deployed. And it made me ask the question, did I give him permission? Did I even talk with him about what his feelings were before he left? Did I even ask him, are you excited to go? Is there a part of you that's going to feel fulfilled to go? I don't know if I even had that conversation with him because I didn't know I needed to have that conversation. But I wonder what it would have been like for him to have that conversation freely and not feel guilty for him saying that he was kind of excited to go too and experience something new, experience something he was called to do and everything that he had trained to do, and how he would have left differently for me to go, that's okay that you feel that way. And I'm glad that if you're going to go, that you're at least excited about what it is that you're going to do. I'd rather you leave and be excited about what you're giving the opportunity to do than leave in a disgruntled way where you're going to have resentment towards everybody for having to be there. So that was where I first realized the power of giving that permission and sitting in that pocket of realizing that they feel this way as far as that push and pull. So I want to do a quick check with everybody who is doing the Sacred Spaces Challenge on how you're doing on that. So if you are watching and you have decided to be intentional, maybe you downloaded and printed out the Sacred Spaces marriage challenge card, so hard to say. And I'm kind of curious, did you come up with something intentional that you are trying to work on specifically to change and pursue your marriage? And did any of you decide to make bracelets, or did you decide to do something different other than that to remind you of that? Go back and watch last week's video if you've not watched on how to do that and breaking that down. My Sacred Space Intentional Marriage Challenge. So the thing that I'm being very mindful of and what my bracelet represents and is a daily reminder of what I'm working on is that I wanted to be more careful with my words, that I wanted to be more kind in my tone, especially to my spouse, in how I address him, and that I'm thoughtful and present and kind with my words. It's not that I tend to be mean or that I lose my temper or anything like that. It's more that with the fatigue of the day or just kind of living around each other every day, I can kind of probably come across apathetic or just kind of not being intentionally present in the conversation, just kind of like whatever. Right. And so I wanted to be a little bit more present and kind. And I want to tell you, those of you who are doing this challenge, I am going to forewarn you that as soon as you make a commitment to work on something that's very specific, so my specific thing is once a day. I'm doing this with my children included, but this is about pursuing your marriage, because if your marriage is healthy, your parenting is going to be healthy. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is at least once a day, am I slowing myself down, making myself very present, especially if I'm in a conversation with my husband, and then am I intentionally saying something kind back to him that says, I heard you, and that I'm pushing down, maybe, and I'm paying attention to those moments where maybe I would kind of brush it off or not be as present, or especially if it's one of those moments that I might be more apt to be defensive, right? And so am I choosing to push that down and instead be selfless and kind in my tone and very present? And so that's what I'm daily reminding myself to do. And anytime you make a challenge like that, right around the corner, there's going to be a test on it. It's just part of life because you're being aware of what's happening around you. And I will tell you, the other day, I could have said something that I thought that the way that I said it was fine, but the way I directed a comment towards my oldest son to my husband, Matt, was not as kind as it should have been. And we had a very long discussion about that. And my defenses rose up. And ultimately, I had to accept the fact that I could have handled that situation better. And I had to bring my spouse, I chose to bring my son back up and talk about it and say how I could have said it better. And here was my kinder way of saying it. So man, was that hard. It is so hard. But this goes to show that my spouse is aware and paying attention. And so that makes that challenge even harder and more important. So very, very important. Stephanie, would you be vulnerable? You don't have to, but would you be willing enough to share what your marriage challenge is? I think that would give people examples of what people are working on. Let's see. Holly says maybe the push and pull, the fun stuff me and my kids do without him when he's gone on a trip. Yes. We send him pictures of all the fun stuff he's missing, which is so hard, right? Because they want to know that you're okay, but at the same time, we feel bad for showing them how much fun we're having. That's tough, right? So we've got to be able to have those conversations of how are you doing with those things that we're sending, and knowing that it's okay for us to have fun at home, and it's also okay for you to be missing those things. But it's also okay for you to have things that you're looking forward to at home. It's also okay for them to have things that they're looking forward to, especially if they're overseas. So that's really, really important to be able to have that communication and give each other the permission to have your own experiences. You're going to find out from this whole marriage book, Sacred Spaces Challenge this summer, is can we be more intentional of having these moments shared together. It's okay that we're having them separate. We need to honor that they're separate experiences. We need to be respectful of the fact that, Holly, your fun things that you're doing with your kids are sacred spaces moments for you. I remember the deployment with my boys, and I look back on those moments with fondness, even though it was stressful. Like, there was just a deep bond that happened between the three of us without my husband there, because it relied on me so much. But we had a lot of fun times together too. That's a sacred space moment that you're going to have for the rest of your life. And your spouse has his sacred space moments that he's happening too. And it's okay that you have separate experiences happening. But the challenge that we're going to be talking about this summer is that when you are together, maybe even creative ways while you're apart, can you have and create shared sacred space moments together to combat the ones that we're having separate, if that makes sense. Chelsea, I agreed to live in a camper versus a home pre-deployment. Let's just say we spent a lot more time on family time. We have talked about that idea, Chelsea. I'm not sure if we're sold on whether or not we could do it. So Stephanie's marriage challenge, she's giving an example, is for her words to be kind and encouraging to build a marriage environment where that is my first response. Okay, so if I were to word yours, Stephanie, even more specific, it would be once a day, I'm going to make sure that my first response is a response of kindness. That would be a very specific, measured, intentional challenge for yourself each day. And that's how specific we want to get, because that way, you know for sure whether or not you did it that day or you didn't. So find ways to kind of tweak that even more. So I'm measuring that by once a day, at least once a day. Did I do that for my spouse especially, but then for my children as well. So giving you that measurement, and other people might say, 3 times a day, I'm going to do something. Or, when my spouse comes to the door each day, I'm going to give him a kiss every day when he walks through the door. That's measurable. That's something that we know for sure whether or not we did it or we didn't. So, great examples. And I so appreciate everybody's commenting and conversation. It makes this so much easier and better. So again, chapter 1 is all about understanding that push-pull, maybe even considering giving your spouse permission to be excited about their mission and calling, that it's also okay for you to figure out the words to ask your spouse to give you permission for the things that you need, because we both need to be doing that for each other. You're going to see in the next chapter how Matt specifically gave me that permission to set my sights on the mission in front of me and not so much stress about the family going on at home. It's impossible for you to ignore the second, it's impossible for you to accept the call and not feel the pull behind you. You can't cut it off completely. But I will say there is a freeing, wonderful experience to be had when your spouse gives you permission. And you're going to see in the next chapter how that impacted me, that he released me and gave me that permission to fully focus. And because I fully focused, that's where I would have not written this book. I would have not had the experience. I would have not changed myself. I would have not changed my marriage if he would not have given me that permission. So if nothing else, I want you guys to hear today that you have incredible influence. You cannot control the changes in your marriage. You can't control your spouse. You can't even control your children, but you have incredible influence if we do the right things for the right reasons, and we're doing something that's intentional to say, I am going to choose to be this person. Like Stephanie is saying, I'm going to choose to intentionally be kind. I want to be a more kind person. And that kind of behavior will influence change in her marriage. It will influence change in her spouse, because her spouse is going to go, what's going on with you? Because usually you get defensive on this, and you weren't. You were just coming back with kindness. And they may say something, they may not say something. But over time, Stephanie's influence into being that kind of person that she wants to be has a greater impact on changing her marriage, and a greater impact, especially on changing herself, which is what this is about in the first place. So hopefully that gives you guys some insight to talk about with your spouses. Talk with, if you want to have a discussion with your spouse on this, ask them, especially if they've experienced a deployment. First responders, couples, you can do this as well, to sit down at the table over dinner and just talk about what is the push-pull experience like for you when you're either leaving to go to work, like Chelsea was talking about, what their experience as a serving spouse is like when they go off to work, if they're a police officer, if they're a firefighter, if they're a military member, what is that push-pull experience like? And if you really want to be challenged, if you really want to have a very interesting conversation with your spouse, ask them, what could I do better to help you have the permission to leave the house and do what you're called to do and be fully focused on the mission so that you don't feel guilty at home? What could I do better to help you do that? Because we all know if we're fully focused on the mission, we come back and we're more present for the role that we have. I think what I'm going to leave you with today is not in the book, but my husband says it all the time to other people. He says to people, he hears from men especially, that they really struggle with, they don't feel like they can be 100% at work, and they don't feel like they can be 100% at home, that they feel like they have to constantly choose, and then they feel like they're not good anywhere. And I think we can all relate to that. And so remember that when you feel that push-pull, when you don't feel like you're fully effective in either place, how can we be the person that our spouse needs so that they feel like they can be 100% at work and then come home and be 100% at home, and that we are a champion of that. So I hope you guys are having a great Monday. I hope you had a great weekend. Next week, we're going to cover the next chapter where things are going to get really exciting. I'm going to share videos and other things that are super fun, some inside information as we go along that's not in the discussion guide or in the book. So that should be fun. If you want to dive deeper and applying this to your marriage and experiencing that accountability, make sure you join the Life Giver group where other couples even and other individuals are in the group talking about each chapter and diving deeper on it and applying it to their lives. So thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you for the discussions, and I'll see you guys back here next Monday. Oh, and don't forget, a new episode of the Life Giver podcast came out today where Matt and I actually talk about how the PCS impacted our marriage and some things that you guys can be thinking about when it comes to big changes in your life and how you can get through big changes in your marriage and how that impacts both people in different ways. It's a super fun conversation, and I think you're going to be laughing through at least half of it. So I hope you have a great week, and I will see you guys next week right back here where we talk about the next chapter. So thanks, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.